Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, can I start? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Leander. I represent the team from Eindhoven. And in this 3 minutes presentation, I will tell you about the 9 months of development of our biosensor for free vancomycin. So the issue with free vancomycin is it's a very small molecule, only 1.5 kilodaltons, which means it is hard to detect on its own. That's why we have decided on a super paragmatic cluster assay, or more simply said, a cluster competition assay, which uses, oh, my slides are going wrong. It uses a large super paragmatic beads of 500 nanometers. There are 80 million kilodaltons, which means they are easy to detect. So let's take a look at the principle of a competition assay. We have free vancomycin present in solution, and there's a large amount of free vancomycin in solution. The probability of antibodies also present in our solution binding to that free vancomycin increases. But there's also a secondary source of free vancomycin, for bound vancomycin. We have vancomycin bound to our beads. And when the antibodies bind to our beads, something special can happen. You can form clusters. Clusters are formed by having the antibody bind on both sides of itself, thus forming a cluster. And these clusters are the things we actually use to measure the amount of free vancomycin present in solution. So let's take a look at how we use the amount of clusters to measure the free vancomycin. We can make them rotate using an external magnetic field because they are super paramagnetic. And when we then illuminate the sample using a laser, we at a 90-degree angle can look at the scattering intensity of the sample. So using some clever data analysis, we can then use the signal that's at our detector to determine the amount of clusters in solution. Let's see how that's done. When you have clusters, you have a varying scattering cross-section. You can imagine the scattering cross-section as like the shadow of the clusters. But the shadow of the single beads does not oscillate in seconds. So when we then look at the final signal that we actually measure, you have a oscillating signal for the clusters, but you do not have a oscillation signal for the single beads. And thus, when we look at how high or the amplitude of this signal, we can then link that back to the amount of clusters, and thus to the amount of free vancomycin present in solution. And then, if we look at a calibration line, we see we are sensitive in the contrast range. We go up about from the baseline about 1.5 x, and then in 9 months we have developed from a large optical setup in the lab to a small standalone working device. I would like to close off by thanking our sponsors, thanking our advisors, and thanking you, the audience, for listening. Thank you. All right, any questions, please? Miss. Yeah, so the slides sadly are animated, so they go back, so that's a shame. But you want to see the measurement principle? This slide here? Yeah, so the beads are covered with vancomycin using EUC NHS coupling. Yeah. No, so we have to manually add the anti-vancomycin antibodies to our solution, also including our beads. So the simple, you take the blood, and then you add the IgG antibodies, and then you add lastly the beads. Any other questions, please? Was it really clear? Or what? Your invention. So our work is based on the work done by our research group here, MBX. We altered because last year they used a principle by Andrea Ranzoni, a PhD student here. they used direct antibody coupling to the beads. We altered this system to an indirect inhibition cluster assay. So we basically switched from antibodies on the beads to antibodies in solution, and instead the analyte on the beads. So that's the major alteration.
So would it help you in terms of dose response if you would choose an IgM type of antibody?
So the funny thing is, we used multiple versions of antibodies, including IgMs, but the ones that we bought commercially didn't work. So you had to use IgGs. When I think about the concept of IgMs, you would have to alter the concentration regime that you're in, because you now have multiple binding spots. So now you go from just 2 to 5 times more. So that would alter the kinetics of the reaction. You would have to do research into how would you utilize IgMs and if that would be advantageous. I'm not sure if that would be the case. Perhaps.
It's actually a very old principle, sort of reinvented concept.
Mm-hmm.
But this is something you used in the 70s when you knew precipitation acids.
Well, so one thing that I did not mention, when you look at the graph at the end, the dose response curve. So when you look at the blue line, you see without actuation, and the red line that goes down is after actuation. So the actuation of the sample means that before we start measuring, we do linear magnetic shots, and that bring the clusters, the beads together, which speeds up the mass transport. So that fastens the assay. So we measure in minutes. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much.